All right. Friends, I'm so delighted that you have joined us today. I'm in a conversation with some of my favorite people who are coming to us from throughout the country. Jacob Armstrong is the pastor at Providence Church in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Matt Miofsky is the pastor at The Gathering in St. Louis, Missouri. And Nick Cunningham, our beloved Nick, who spent so many years with us here at Ginghamsburg, has
Yeah.
launched a new church, the Emmaus Church in Columbia, South Carolina. Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you're here with us. Today, we're talking a little bit about relationships, particularly mentoring relationships and the impact those kinds of relationships have on our lives. And so I just want to get started with a simple question. Friends, who mentored you in the first place? Like, who was that first mentor that had a really incredible impact on your life?
Who's going first?
Don't all start at once.
Maybe we should have established that. I guess I'll go. First of all, Ginsburg, I miss y'all. You rock. Man, early on, I had a good friend of mine. His dad was one of the first ones, I think, maybe to recognize things in me that I certainly hadn't really seen in myself. I played sports. I knew myself as a jock, as an athlete, and I think growing up as a chubby kid, I'd learned to be funny. So it's kind of like it's like all I knew myself to be. Is like I can make you laugh and I can play sports. But he was one of the first ones that recognized that there's more going on than that, and even just he was really aggressive with that. I would say like he wouldn't let me just fall back into that sort of role that I would tend to play in group settings. He was the first one to really kind of push me like into leadership roles, and I'm grateful he did. I didn't like him at first, for that, but looking back now, I'm certainly grateful.
That's super good. Okay, Matt, tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to faith, one of my earliest mentors really was my childhood pastor, and I often reflect back. I deal in my own church. I have a lot of people who come to me and had really bad childhood experiences of church, or were burned by church, or felt betrayed by church, or not welcomed. And I feel sometimes really lucky that I grew up in a community that was affirming, gave me space to kind of figure out who I was. And then there were some people there that just helped me to name some things that they saw in me that I couldn't yet see for myself. And so my childhood pastor was one of those people, along with a few others in the church, who from a really early age, invited me to do things in the church, just to volunteer. I think he had other motives at the time. He saw something in me, but it appeared like just an invitation. And then when I was 14, he asked me to preach and kind of taught me how to write a sermon and offer a word. And it was a small church, but standing up there for the first time and preaching, it just was a place where I got to test out some of my own gifts and just begin to maybe try to name some of those things. And so they saw in me things that I couldn't see in myself, which today is still, I think, one of my primary understandings of what a mentor really does.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for me, I think of kind of the first person that I walked alongside for a number of years, like in his shadow, was a guy named Gary. My sophomore year in college, became an intern at a church under this guy named Gary, who was the missions pastor and the student pastor. And just for a number of years, I just was his assistant. That was my job, and I walked alongside of him. And it's crazy how many things that are a part of like my ministry now and the church that we helped start that are just like his DNA, to be like a deep spirituality and to be passionate about worship. And mainly he was this guy who in a downtown area, we got in a van every day and went into the neighborhoods and sort of took care of people in all kinds of different ways. And it just still surprises, the people that you disciple under, that's just becomes a part of who you are. So I think of Gary for that question, Rachel.
Yeah, that's really good. When I really think of this question, it takes me back to the first grade. I had a first grade teacher named Mrs. Hilbert, at least if that, I'm remembering correctly, that was her name. And I really didn't like school in kindergarten. And then for whatever reason, she saw in me this deep desire to learn and to write. And she encouraged me to write like crazy. And for the very first time ever, it was like a healthy adult outside of my own parents who took an interest in me and said, I see something more in you than what you're displaying. And so I just remember her encouraging me in this just incredible way to be more, like you were saying, Nick, more than I was being in that moment. So in some ways, actually, when I wrote my first book all by myself, I gave a shout out to her because I really believe she planted that seed way back in the first grade. So any first grade teachers out there, you're making a difference, right? You're making a difference. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about Mike Slaughter today. He's preaching a great sermon. And how has Mike's mentorship really impacted your ministry?
Who's Mike?
Yes. I love you, Jacob. That is awesome.
No, I'll start. I mean, probably no pastor has had a bigger impact on me than Mike. And I was thinking about this in preparation for the day because, of course, there's so many things we could list with Mike with his, being a prophetic voice and fighting for justice. But as I really pondered on it, and it's surprising for somebody who has a voice that is as big as his and so many people that connect, like the thing that he did for me over, well over a decade now is just never let me go, like he just always engaged me. He always criticized me in the right kind of way, poked at me, but also loved me, and like knows my wife's name and asked about her and cares. I mean, it just sounds like anti-Mike, but it's not, right? That's like really who he is. And so the mentor that he was, the thing that stood out for me is unbelievably, he's just engaged me in my life and ministry over and over and over so that there is that kind of immediate connection when he calls and we can just go right to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I'll share something similar. Mike, for me, and I'm sure for Jacob and Nick as well. Growing up Methodist and then going into seminary, Mike was someone I knew about, and I watched with admiration the work that he did and the work that Ginghamsburg does. Early pioneers in contemporary worship and the use of creative arts in worship, and then later on in his ministry, sort of the work towards justice and for the church making a difference outside its own walls, even the practical measures of giving away, Christmas Eve offerings and things like that. So I for a long time admired Mike's ministry. And when I first encountered him, it was really in that context of, wanting to seek learning and advice on ministry. But very quickly, where Mike made his biggest impact was on my personal life much more than on my ministry. So as important as those ministry, that kind of ministry leadership is to the larger church, Mike is one of the few pastors that was never too busy to get invested in me as a person. So in my personal life. And I think probably two places where he's made the biggest difference for me is one in my marriage. He constantly, anybody who kind of knows him behind the scenes, the first question basically is, how's your marriage? Tell me about that. Are you making time for your spouse? And kind of speaking to what it's like to have a healthy marriage and to be in a church that demands so much of us. So I think that for me, what kind of spouse I am and what kind of father I am, those are the two things that Mike probably asks me. And we talk about that more than we talk about techniques or ministry or leadership or anything like that. So what I will remember Mike most for in our personal mentoring relationship is the way that he has helped me to invest in my family and in my marriage, even as I give so much to the work beyond my own family and the church.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Man, I could talk forever, I was like every inappropriate joke that I know, I learned from Mike. That's definitely true. Taught me a really great margarita recipe, corrupted
It's
me
true.
he's corrupted me in all the right ways. But man, I mean, so much of who I am, what I say. I mean, that was like one of the irritating things when I eventually left Ginsburg, is when I would hear myself say the things that he said all the time, and it was like, when I was there and he would say it, you'd roll your eyes because you've heard it so many times. You're just like, oh, here we go again. But then you find yourself in a new context, and you find yourself saying those things, not just saying, but believing them. And like
Yeah.
that's been really powerful for me, just to how much he shaped my life. I think about my own disciplines. Like when I first started at Ginsburg, I was a mess financially. Like I was just a wreck, and I was one of the student pastors at the time, and I hadn't started tithing yet. Like I was about to. I had this like come to Jesus moment one night in my apartment before I was going to get married, and I was like, I can't keep living this way. It's going to be bad. So I had signed up to have my tithe like automatically taken out of my paycheck. And so I hadn't met him in person yet at this point. Like he had kind of been in and out. So I'm in my office that morning, unpacking my stuff. All of a sudden, I notice somebody comes in behind me, closes the door, and sits down. I turn around, it's him. And I'm like, whoa, it's like you, And he went right for it. He's like, listen, I've heard a lot of great things about you. Love that you're here, but if you don't start tithing, we're gonna have to let you go. And what he explained to me was like, he's like, we're calling people to a sacrificial way of life,
Yeah.
and we can't do that. We can't call them to that if we're not doing it ourselves. And that moment changed me so much. And
Yeah.
I would say that like leads into one of the things that I love about him, and that I think is so needed right now, still more than ever, is his commitment to say and do the right thing, like especially when it's the hard thing.
Yeah.
Like he never shies away from that. I can't tell you how many times as a student pastor there, I had to go and recruit a bunch of new volunteers because he ticked them all off and they all left. So it's like, all right, here we go. But it was just watching him time after time in these moments where a lot of people would shrink back because they were afraid of who they would offend, who they would lose, what it would cost them. He would just go right into that, and I think we're all better for it, because of it.
Mhm.
But something I hopefully I can take with me.
That's so good. That's so good. The first time that I ever met Mike Slaughter, he offended me 3 times in the first conversation. I mean, like, he asked, we were sitting at a Young Pastors Network gathering, and it was my husband and I and another couple. And he looks at my husband and says, What church are you at? And my husband was like, I'm not the pastor, she is. And then he asked me, okay, what's your church? And I was at EUM at the time in Greenville, near here. And he said, oh, I hear they're dying. And then he said, now what seminary did you go to? And I said, Duke Divinity School. And he said, oh, cool. They have great Christology, but their praxis sucks, and then he walked away. He said nothing else. He just walked away. And then for whatever reason, kind of in that same weekend, he stops me and says to me, Rachel Billups, I didn't even know he knew my name. Didn't think he did. I'm your champion. And I thought, oh, that's weird. Oh man, I don't even know who you are. And then from like that moment on, he's pulled me in to various things. And there have been some moments where, I mean, today I was just thinking about like when I was a senior pastor at Shiloh in Cincinnati, he invited myself and my leadership board chair to be part of the leadership board retreats here. Like, I mean, nothing was off limits. He just kept pulling me in and pouring into me. And frankly, I mean, in some ways, I was a nobody. And yet he just said, it doesn't matter. I see something in you and I'm going to give you everything that I've got. I'm going to pour into you. So, yeah, he's just been incredible. A pain in the butt. Incredible. All right. So, I think we've also learned this from Mike. We can't just hoard all of this ourselves. I mean, we've been, those of us on this call, I mean, we're some of the most poured into relatively young pastors in the country. What are we doing with that? How are you paying that kind of gift forward?
Well, I mean, this might be easier for y'all to answer right now than for me. I mean, we're like 6 months old, and half of that's been virtual in a quarantine. So right now it's just me and a few other people. But I think this is flows out of something I always admired about Mike. Is that he talks a lot about this habit of lifelong learning. That's one of those things he beats in
Yeah.
his brain. He didn't just talk about that; like he practiced it. And not even just in the books that he would read, but like his willingness to learn from even the younger people that he had surrounded himself with. These
Yeah.
younger leaders. I was always so just intrigued by that. Some people have called that reverse mentorship.
Yeah.
Where they recognize that there's things that they can glean from folks who aren't as old, as wise, as mature as they are. And he took a big risk. I think when I transitioned from a high school specialist, that's what they called it, sounds like an assassin or something, right? Into the teaching pastor role. At that point in time, I hadn't even taken a seminary class. I hadn't started, I shouldn't say this out loud, I guess, I hadn't started the Methodist ordination process. I think I'd preached like 3 sermons my entire life to adults, and he invited me to be preaching on a regular basis. Like the risk that he took,
Yeah.
and that blows my mind. And so I know for me, I've told myself this a lot, is like, when I am in that place and I recognize this younger leader, who has influence and who is gifted or whatever, I'm going to fight really hard this feeling of like not being threatened by them. I think a lot of times when you get established in leadership, you can see where when someone else comes along, how easy it is to be threatened by them, and it was really powerful to watch him sort of resist that and take risks on a lot of us.
It's good.
Yeah, that word, Nick, and risk, and then something you were talking about, Rachel, which is just accessibility, I think is what it makes me think of. Certainly, this conversation convicts me to want to do more, but just thinking about the young pastors on our staff and spend an hour with one of them, sitting, drinking a cup of coffee today, just kind of talking through all the stuff, that's sort of like Mike Slaughter, just to be accessible and talk through it. And then right before I came here, I went to a retirement for one of our police detectives. He's been a detective for 20 years, and he was baptized in our church and is kind of being sent out in a way to do ministry. He's a local pastor now,
That's
and
incredible.
just thinking about the way these people that come in our path, and people like Mike and our other mentors taught us to pay attention, to think, somebody, a police officer baptized in a cattle trough in a middle school can, is has so much in them that God is going to use, that, and we just kind of walk alongside of them, to where I was just standing in the back of the room at this big retirement reception, and the chief called me up there unexpected, to again just sort of speak into his life. And that's all I knew to do, was just to like look at him and look at his wife and his kids and speak that into him. So that's what I think of taking risk. We've had 2 female church planters leave our church who I would have wanted to keep on staff forever. And there's that risk of being like, yeah, if you pour into these people, I had one of them say, I drank the Kool-Aid, so now I have to go do this, somewhere else. So you risk losing those folks, and then just kind of remaining accessible, even when there's more and more demands on you.
Yeah, I would echo some of those same things. I think that one thing that I've tried to do is, as I've gotten older, as I've gotten to do this a little bit longer, I still try to maintain a mentor relationship with people who are further down a road that I want to walk. And so I try to do that. At the same time, I try to remember that this journey isn't just mine, but I need to turn around and make space and time for other people who are wanting to walk a similar path. And so, as Jacob said, I think accessibility is important. We can get so busy with what we're doing and think, I don't have time for this, and then I have to stop and remember I wouldn't be here if it weren't for all those people that had poured into me. So I try to just carve out a certain amount of time, and then really seeing the people that I get the chance to work with as people that I also have an opportunity to mentor. Uh, Similarly, we just sent out 3 pastors this spring from our church. Each are now leading churches of their own, and as hard as that is, because we really enjoyed having them, we celebrated that as a church, and just celebrated the fact that our church had an opportunity to shape, 3 women who are now leading churches, and in some cases, really large churches around our state. So I think the older I get, I find it rewarding to know that maybe I played a role, or I got to walk alongside somebody who's now living out their gifts in a greater way. And that in some ways my ambitions uh, have have shifted from me needing to be somebody, which
Yeah.
regrettably probably was part of my early ambition, or me needing to write a book, or me needing to be on the stage. So if I had to name an ambition now, even even if it had unhealthy elements, it's probably, my ambition is to, I hope I can play a role in other future great leaders, so that when they look back, they say, oh yeah, and I learned a lot from Matt, or Matt made time, or that was a ministry that really shaped me early on. So I think that I look for more of those kinds of opportunities. And the last thing I would say is I try to be open to the fact that God might raise up unlikely people that He wants me to invest time in. I think I was an unlikely person for
Yeah.
certain people to make space for, and so not just to look for kind of the predictable mentees, but the surprises that God might bring into your life for a particular purpose, and you need to be open to that.
Mm.
I think that's a really good word. And I realize many of you are just preaching Mike's sermon for him. So thank you for doing that. But when I think about this question for myself, I realized just last week I was in a conversation with a woman I'm mentoring who's a pastor in Indianapolis. And even that conversation made me realize how much more of this I need to be doing. The reality is when I look at the screen, we have this responsibility and this honor of being pastors in influential places, and our voices really do matter. But they don't matter just so that we can have a platform. They matter so that we can share all of that resource with someone else. And I certainly want to see a whole new generation of people who answer a call, and whether that call looks like vocational ministry or not, they're just set on fire through the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And I think you're exactly right. For us to be a catalyst for that is not just needed, it's necessary. And so get after it. We got to get after it, because I think, what I'm seeing on the screen, man, the world needs this. And we can't relent, particularly in the world that we find ourselves in. We cannot relent. Well, friends, it has been delightful to be in this conversation with the three of you. And I know every single moment of this is going to be a gift to Ginghamsburg and a gift to our movement. So I just have to say thank you. And we're certainly praying for you and your ministry, that God just multiplies in ways, even in this COVID season, that you could never ask or imagine. And certainly I covet those same prayers from you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
All right. End.